Okay, so now we have Ronald Hendel. He says that you and Professor Kitchen start with the assumption that the Bible is inerrant and that you use historical details to confirm that assumption. For example, if the Bible says that the Israelites built Pithom and Rameses, Hendel claims that you would use that as evidence that the entire story is true. He considers that as a mistake comparable to treating Shakespeare's play about Julius Caesar as historically accurate just because it happens to get a few details about ancient Rome. So, what do you think about this comment?
Well, Ron Hendel and I have written against each other quite a bit. Um, if you look at, and I think your quote came from the Five Views on Exodus. Is that, yeah, the book, The Five Views of the Exodus is interesting. This book, five different scholars were presenting their ideas, and one of them was Gary Rensburg, who we've mentioned already. And uh, each of us was to present our view, and then we could critique the other positions that were taken. Well, when Ron Hendel begins, he's supposed to begin telling us what he thinks, and he begins attacking me. Not presenting his case, but attacking me and Kitchen. So, uh, yeah, I mean, there is a point to what he's saying, and I'm not saying that um, I'm not saying that these details prove the historicity. But we all know if these details were wrong, they would say, aha, it proves it's not historical. So you can't insist that the Bible gets all the details right. And then when it gets it right, then says, well, it's still wrong. Okay, that's number one. Number two, and again, remember, this book is we're supposed to present our views and our arguments and present the data that leads to and I did that. Never in my writing on this subject, in my books, in my articles, do I ever refer to inerrancy. I never appeal to it. Well, I believe it anyway because it's inerrant. I've never done that in any academic uh, forum, whether it's a conference or a paper or a book, um, because I think that is a question of theology. And this is what Kenneth Kitchen would say. I'm not interested in theology. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in the facts. I'm interested in the data and where it leads us. And yes, uh, so what he Ron Hendel does is a typical thing. It's like saying, uh, when did you stop beating your wife? Well, has it been established that I beat my wife? But you've already condemned me for something I've never done, or I've never said, I've never advocated. So what I believe theologically is something I cannot prove. But I can, working with the Egyptian materials, and that's my area of specialization, I can do the sort of thing I did in this presentation, and I think it lends credibility and authenticity. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to these historical questions about the Bible, it's like in a jury case, if there is no living witness who saw what happened, you have to deal with the circumstantial evidence. You have to deal with other things, DNA, blood type, some other things. And what we call, or what the legal community calls the preponderance of evidence. And in the preponderance of evidence kind of case, basically what you have to say is 51% chance it's right. Whereas in a death penalty case, you have to have all the juries and they have to believe 100% it's right. So what I'm trying to say is all we can do with archaeology and history is make a preponderance of evidence. The preponderance of evidence leads us in this direction. And I never appeal to inerrancy. That's not to say I don't believe in it, or what I would call historical inerrancy. I believe you had Joshua Berman on your program before?
Yes, also, yeah.
Yes. So he uses the term historical inerrancy. Um, and the problem with the word inerrancy is that it means different things to different people. Uh, for some more conservative people in America, that means everything is to be read literally. And for me, it's not to be read literally, it's to be read as it was intended to be understood. And the best way, from a strictly exegetical, historical basis, is to read it uh, in the original language against the background that's furnished by ancient history and archaeology. Um, so that's my approach. I never say that, well, I believe uh, uh, Abraham lived because my view of inerrancy. What I would say is there are a lot of things in the book of Genesis and beyond that makes it look like he's a historical figure. We have genealogical records. We have later history referring back to him. We have the stories themselves. So you can make other arguments than just, well, I believe it's the Bible, therefore it's true. Uh, I never do that. So he's basically accusing me of something I don't do, and and that's his reason for attacking me. He doesn't like to be critiqued himself. So I found that out when at a conference where he's got up and attacked me before in public. So he's a complainer.
Yeah, it's too bad. But even Professor Rensburg said in book Five Views about the Exodus that he uses ad hominem about yeah, attacking personality rather than arguments. So I
Right.
disagree with Handel. But
Yeah.
okay, he goes on to say that you do the same with loan words. For instance, the word for linen is of Egyptian origin. But he argues that Egypt was a major economic and political power. Even today, we speak of Egyptian cotton as something luxurious. So that doesn't prove anything about any specific story in which an Egyptian word for linen appears. The same goes for words like ink or and pen. It's only natural that the Hebrews would borrow those words from the Egyptians who used papyrus, pens, ink, and so on.
Yeah. So, but what I think is interesting is that linen is used in mainly in two places. The Joseph story set in Egypt, and in the Exodus in the priestly and tabernacle um, sections, and they've just come out of Egypt with all the different things that they've carried with them out of Egypt. So what's noteworthy then is that uh, Genesis is set in Egypt and Exodus is set in Sinai. So you just come out of Egypt with linen. So so the fact that they correspond to those stories and not later stories. And later stories where linen comes up, the word boots is used. The only time, um, the only time linen comes up outside of Genesis and Exodus in the Torah is in Proverbs, where the prostitute is decorating her bed, getting ready for the fool with and the word sheish is used, the Egyptian linen. So yes, it's true, Egyptian linen was known, but it's only one place in the Bible um, other than Genesis and Exodus, which are Egyptian settings.
Yes, but maybe Proverbs quotes or alludes to Pentateuch, so maybe it borrows from there, not from Egypt, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny his point that, but it's not like, um, it's not like I don't know that there's really evidence that Egyptians exported linen. Um, I'm trying to remember one text, but it slips my mind right now. But um, yeah, I don't know that they exported. They exported papyrus, we know, um, but anyway, so uh, maybe it wasn't as well known as he thought. or thinks.
Yes, thank you. But finally, he comments on the name Potiphar. Well, he says like this quote, well, if your story includes a man in Egypt, then naturally you would want to give him a name that sounds Egyptian. People do this today too. For instance, in a movie, if you have a German character, how do you signal that he is a foreigner? You give him a British accent. That's a cinematic trick. So in a story, you have an Egyptian master and you give him an Egyptian sounding name. It doesn't even have to be a real Egyptian name, just something that sounds like it. Like if you have a Russian spy, you call him Boris, and if you have and his partner Natasha, that doesn't mean that story of Boris and Natasha comes from the Soviet Union. It just means you know some Russian sounding names to assign to your characters. So it's a meaningless inference. Saying that a name is Egyptian means nothing in terms of the historical accuracy of the events. You and I could come up with names like that ourselves, even without knowing anything about Egyptian history. I just thought of Boris and Natasha without knowing a thing about Russian espionage, or Juan or Lopez. Some names come from, say, Spain. If you're an ancient Israelite and you don't know a single Egyptian name, then you're pretty ignorant. So this is a long quote. So how you answer?
Well, I would say that I think he is reading a modern way of knowing things and modern way of thinking, um, that doesn't necessarily apply to things 3,000 and more years ago. Um, uh, yeah. So, uh, I mean, in theory, he could be right. But again, I go back to my argument that I made earlier. If if Joseph's father-in-law was given the name Robert, uh, then you would say, well, that clearly isn't Egyptian. So why does the author feel the need to make things sound authentic for an audience? And by the way, one of the things that critical scholarship never really addresses is that things that moderns look at and say, well, this is fictitious, this is legendary. At the same time, you move later in scripture, and the fellow Hebrews of maybe a couple centuries later understand Abraham as a real person, understand Moses as a real person. The only people who have problems with Moses as a real person are modern people. So why is that? In other words, if the ancient people heard the stories or read the narratives or had the narratives read to them about Moses or Joseph, uh, why would they think they're real? I mean, surely they of all people would know the literary qualities of fiction versus history. And yet they treat them all as historical characters and historical events. So we come along after the Enlightenment, and we know so much better than the ancient people do about their own culture and literature. I think this is condescending. Somehow we know better today than they knew about themselves. And to me, this is the problem with Western academic arrogance, that somehow we know better than they did. So I see no good reason to like a Tom Clancy novel where you're trying to make it look real. You're trying to make everything realistic. So why does a biblical writer want to make something look realistic and does such a good job that for 3,000 years nobody had a problem with it? So if you again, I try to think the way ancient people would think. And I do that by trying to spend as much time as I can studying the literature, the other sources, the iconography. Those are the things that shaped the images they had in mind. Now it's true, of course, in Canaan after the late Bronze Age, the Egyptian armies that had garrisons in Canaan were all leaving probably 1130, 1120 BC. The final Egyptians move out. So I'm sure, yes, that in the early Israelite period, they would have known some Egyptian names and so on. But that picture changes quite radically when you go 200-300 years later. Those Egyptians and the memories of that are lost. Again, one of the things that um, Ron does is that his whole idea is based on the memory of the Exodus and the sojourn and the hardship is based on Egyptian empire controlling Canaan in the late Bronze Age. And so that the Exodus and the celebration is really the celebration of the Egyptians retreating and going back as the new kingdom is collapsing. And I thought that doesn't really make any sense because we don't read of any celebration anywhere. Why would they have to make up a story about leaving Egypt if it's the Egyptians leaving Canaan? So the theories just don't match what the text is talking about. So when you take the approach Hendel does, you can make up anything. And that's what he does. I try to stick to the text and stick to the data.